drive around, raise the sunroof, rap it loud. We gon' come through, cause we got no time to waste. Gotta rap where we come from. Ain't a fight that we could ever run from. Tell your girl she can kick it if she wants some, but we got no time to waste.
Welcome to 4AZ. I'm your host, Tyler McDowell Blanken, and we are back to discuss the latest happenings at our favorite school, Abbott Elementary. Now, I know you're loving that new intro music as much as I am. Shout out to my guy, Eli, of Phoenix's own Drive Safe for the track. It's titled No Time to Waste Part 2, off their 2024 EP with Planner, I guess. You can follow Drive Safe at DRV_SF_. Check them out on Apple Music and Spotify. I'm also excited to announce that our show is officially joining 19 Media Group. 19 Media is a Black-owned network dedicated to amplifying voices together. Thank you, Mo and Warren, for your belief and for this wonderful opportunity. Follow the network, and you're sure to discover other podcasts from passionate hosts. With topics ranging from sports to pop culture, you won't be disappointed. Check them out at 19 Media Group or by visiting 19mediagroup.com. Now, before we get started, I want to take a moment to send my love to all of you watching and listening. We're living in a very interesting time, especially as public educators and those who care about the health and longevity of the public education school system in these United States, and especially here in Arizona. I hope this episode brings you joy and whatever you may be needing at this moment. On this edition, I welcome back Marana Unified School District 3rd grade teacher Sarah Beth to recap episodes 9 and 10 of season 4. A big congratulations to the cast and crew. News came out yesterday that Abbott has been renewed for a 5th season. What are you thinking of season 4? We'd love to know your takes. Follow us at 4AZTeach. Please be sure to like this video, leave us a 5-star review on your audio platform of choice, or even share it with the Abbott fan in your life. All of it means the world to me and goes so far. Thank you. And we are back with Sarah Beth, a familiar face, a familiar voice. Sarah, you joined us back in October to discuss episodes 1 and 2 of season 4 of the greatest show on television, Abbott Elementary. You are back. I'm so happy to see you. How you been?
I've been good. I'm glad to be back.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I put out the bat signal. I put out the call. Abbott is back. They took some time off, as did we. Who wants to talk about the show with me? And you were one of the first people to respond. I am so grateful for you. Again, we're going to get into episodes 9 and 10, episode 9, volunteer, and then episode 10, testing. I know you have thoughts on both of these. Before we get there, how was your fall semester? How are your third graders in Marana?
Good. We've been doing a lot of modifying. I know we talked last time just on how these post-COVID kids are very different, needing a lot of executive functioning skills and things like that. And so I feel like we're finally in a groove. It's a very interesting, coming back from winter break where, the kids are rocking and rolling, really settling back into routine. So things have been really good.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's good. In terms of the executive functioning, It sounds like you've seen a lot of wins. Yes. Because what I gather from a lot of my teacher friends are that those skills, in large part to your hard work and creativity, those skills are really being recouped. And we're starting to see, 2020 to 22, 23, very, very difficult for everyone involved in schools. But maybe there's been that, I was going to try to avoid a cliche, but I can't now. There's that light at the end of the tunnel of, maybe the kids will be all right. Maybe they know how to have respectful academic, healthy talk.
They're definitely getting there.
I'm glad.
Part of it,
it's been a process though. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a process. We spent a lot of time teaching preschool executive functioning lessons, which I hate.
Tell us about that. What is that
preschool? So executive functioning, right, are the things that we know how to do, to raise our hand, impulse control, things like that, waiting patiently. And so these kids come in following just one step directions. And so I sat with my principal probably back in October, and I was like, hey, this group is struggling. And my group last year struggled with it. And she's like, yeah, you know what they need. And I'm like, oh. So we have a preschool executive functioning. It's preschool and kinder program. And so it walks them through lessons that help teach and reinforce those skills that they don't have. And the lessons are great, but I hate it because like I don't do preschool. Like I don't do nursery rhymes. I don't do puppets. I don't do like
Yeah.
acting.
The third graders
Uh-huh.
would shun those.
Which is what you think, right? And so no, they loved it. So
Really?
she's like, pull
Good
out
for
the
them.
lessons. And so like their lessons were like, we're singing Five Little Monkeys sitting jumping on a bed or bingo. So one of the ones that like my kids really love is that you sing bingo, but you have to like clap out certain letters. So like the first round, you have to clap on the B instead of saying it. So it teaches them impulse control because they have to be thinking, oh, I clap and then keep singing the other letters. And then you do like B-I, you're clapping till you're not saying anything, you're just clapping the letters. And so there are these lessons, which like they are great and they're scientifically backed. But again, you're like the whole time we're doing them, I'm just praying no one comes in for an informal, which isn't like me because I have such an open door policy. But I'm like, I don't want
Oh, that's
anyone
great.
coming
That's
in
healthy.
here. And the
Yeah.
first couple of times I'm like, my kids are going to think these are so stupid. Like, I'm not going to have buy-in. No, they loved it.
I
And
love it.
like,
Wow.
it really
Kids
helped,
surprise us sometimes.
right? Yeah, they always surprise us.
That's
But
great.
like, it's a lot of, we spent a lot of time doing those like very basic. We've been doing a lot of like cross-lateral movements in class because like really kids are so like screen addicted these days that they're not getting that like fine motor, but also like crossing the midline is so important for like your brain's development. And they're just not doing that like they did like when we were kids because they're spending all day on a tablet or a game.
Right. And often, to your point, Sarah, district approved
Yeah.
tablets, which is
Uh-huh.
not nefarious. We want
Yeah.
kids to have nice things. We
Uh-huh.
know now the resources that kids have,
Mhm.
technologically speaking, in schools, vastly different than when you and I were coming up. I
Yeah.
remember when our teachers in elementary school had to schedule time for us to use the computer lab.
Right.
I
It was
forget
like
if we
once a
spoke
month.
about this. Yeah, I forget. Yeah, but and it was a big deal when we got to go to the lab.
Yep.
And I forget if we spoke about this in October. Even if we did, I'm still going to talk about it now. I'll never forget those. I think it was Type to Learn, or we
Mhm.
had these activities where it was just about improving our typing and
Yeah.
our speed and our, like our efficacy as
Mhm.
digital learners. And you think now our kiddos have tablets and they're so
It's a whole different
savvy
world.
with all this.
Yeah.
It's a complete, and that to me, without revealing my tender age, Sarah Beth, that doesn't feel like it was that long ago, and yet here we
Oh,
are. So much
right.
has changed.
And I think that too, like, speaks so much to like education. Like, I'd like to say it wasn't that long ago. I also would like not to reveal my age. But like how much has changed since we were in school, even since this is my 10th year, 12th year in the district, like teaching, how much has changed since I first started teaching to like the access to like resources we have now. Like AI was one of the biggest examples, like learning how to like utilize it to help with like lesson planning and things like that has been.
How are those conversations going at your
They're
center?
good. I think one of the hard things is a lot of people want to use it and it's a great time saver, but also it's kind of like teacher pay teacher. Like you have to learn how to vet it.
Teachers
And
pay teachers.
like,
If you know, teachers
if
pay
you know,
teachers.
you know. Teachers pay teacher, great in a pinch. But also, like, if you don't know how to vet a resource to actually look at it and say, like, oh, this is actually what I need my students doing, or this is good quality. And so, like, I think AI, Chat GPT, Khan Academy now has like a Khan Amigo thing, Magic School. There's all these like different like AI things being pushed out to teachers, and they're great if they're used appropriately and if they're vetted appropriately. But like I think that's one of the hard things is like having to have that conversation of like I'm seeing a lot of like copy and paste without actually like vetting it from some people.
Mhm. Yeah. And then it sounds like it's twofold for you.
Yeah.
It's not only having these conversations with your colleagues on staff and with admin about AI in the district, AI potentially in the classroom, but it's also navigating these conversations with your students because to your point, they're aware and I
Yeah.
think they often know more than we give them credit for. Have you had those conversations about AI
Um,
with students, or
Third
is
grade,
that
not as
not as
much.
much? Okay,
Um,
they don't have Chat GPT accounts
They
just
don't. The
yet.
one thing we've used it a couple of times as a class for like inspiration. So one of the things we did for our reading groups back in like December is they read, I don't know if you've ever seen their picture book series. And so they're like, what would you do if you had a tail like that? What would you do if you had a nose like that? And so then each page is like a different animal. And it talks about, so it'll be like an elephant trunk, and it'll talk about like how the elephant's trunk helps it. And then how you could use it as a human if you had an elephant trunk. And so it's a whole series. And so I like to take those books and have the kids go through them and pick the different body parts and then make their own animal.
Oh wow.
And then they
Okay.
have to use like text evidence. So like I would want an elephant trunk because, and then like
Right. Okay.
whatever the text
That gets you
says.
to the next part of the lesson,
Yeah.
and then
And then I have them draw that animal based on what they picked. And so what we did was we used one of the like picture generators and typed in create an animal with a nose like an elephant, wings like an eagle, or whatever. And so it helped them because that was where they really struggled, was like visualizing it. And so then it gave them some choices that they could like base theirs off of. So there's been some ways we've used it. Third grade, I'm not worried about them like going to Chat GPT and being like, create a paragraph.
let me turn to that essay
So,
due tomorrow.
yeah, like they don't quite understand
Awesome.
that aspect of it yet.
Sure. The day will come.
So right now they're just like, we've used it just more like to generate like ideas and imagination type stuff.
That's cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, ideally that's an ideal use of AI right now, is as educators, using it to generate those ideas, if it makes sense for your student, the age group, etc., allowing them the opportunity to play around with it, because we know it's already here, there's no turning back. But for idea generation or for enhancement, not the entire creation of said essay or the entire creation of said lesson plan. We have teachers pay teachers for that. We already, we got that market covered.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like there's pieces to it that are really good, and teaching kids how to use it appropriately, right? Like when we were in
It's an
school,
important
we were
conversation.
told, not to use Wikipedia as a resource. Wikipedia is one of my favorite resources.
God.
Like,
do you remember there was a big X over Wikipedia?
You were never allowed to
I've
use
even
it,
said
never
that in my
allowed to cite
early days.
And like I totally understand why,
thing.
right? Because anyone can technically update Wikipedia.
Which is true.
And so like, I agree, in a scholarly article, but man, I need a fact and a pinch. Like
there's a difference between I need it in a fact or in a pinch, as you said, versus it's my first source on that works cited page.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a difference.
And it's a good place to go to look to get an idea, and then go back and say, oh, I learned this quick fact here. I need more information about it.
Facts.
Good place to start.
Facts. All right, Sarah Beth, I'm going to check myself. I brought up a works cited page. So that's a sign that we are just, I've led us astray. So we will get back. We are
back to
here.
Abbott.
Yeah. Like, oh man, that's okay. So back to Abbott, as you said, my friend. Let's jump right into it. So Abbott took a break around the holidays, as we mentioned at the start of this conversation, but they have returned the past 2 weeks. In fact, episode 9, Volunteer, garnered 3.8 million views on ABC, by far the most viewed episode of the season. And of course, Sarah Beth, this should not be a surprise. This episode was the long-awaited crossover event with It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Okay, here's the plot description. The district sends a group of volunteers, which turns out to be the Patty's Pub gang from the aforementioned It's Always Sunny. While at Abbott, Mac becomes Ava's assistant principal, and Dee helps in Janine's classroom and attempts to seduce Gregory. This is true. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Jacob, Barbara, and Melissa notice Charlie's illiteracy, and Barbara teaches him how to read. And Frank helps with the garden. Okay, my friend, I'm going to mention the cold open, and then I want to kick it to you. For this particular episode, opening the show, Ava announces to the staff, they're all meeting in the gym for this staff meeting, if you will. I've gone to, mostly libraries are the spot for staff meetings. I found it interesting that this one was in the gym. We've seen their library too, but
Yeah.
alas, I'm not going to bring up works cited pages anymore. Ava announces to the staff during this meeting that volunteers are coming. That elicits complaints amongst all the staff about the perils of teaching. You hear complaints about, well, I got a grade, or the facilities, so on and
The
so forth.
vents.
We've been in these rooms. We've been in these meetings, Sarah Beth. So then Ava asks, you all are acting like the school is falling apart? And now she just kind of says it, right? And then, of course, cue to the scoreboard on the wall proceeding to fall from said wall in epic fashion. Then we cue the music, and then we officially start off this episode. Sarah Beth, your initial thoughts on episode 9 of season 4, Volunteer. We've been waiting a long time for this one.
We have been. I loved it. So I don't know if you know, there's a follow-up with It's Always Sunny coming out later this year, which I'm excited.
Yes, for their first episode of their new season.
Because I think they did I was a little worried, or not worried, but like going into it, because It's Always Sunny is very raunchy, and like it's an FX show. And so this crossover, we're not only crossovering like shows, but we're crossovering networks on top of that. And like FX is definitely more like out there and can get away with more. And so I wasn't sure how it was going to be played, where I was like, oh, is it going to be like where they make like It's Always Sunny? Like, is it really It's Always Sunny? Like, it can come off just kind of weird sometimes with crossovers where it just feels out of place. And I feel like they did such a good job of the crossover. I'm really excited to see how it plays out on FX now. But I absolutely loved this episode. I like that. I haven't watched It's Always Sunny in a couple of seasons, but like Charlie learning to read was so great. And because that's a long-standing joke on the show, is that like, I don't think Charlie can read. Yeah. He's like, no,
and then they had the graduation ceremony.
And then they had the graduation
later on in the episode. And the kids were clapping. And
I think my favorite part is that they clearly put him in one of the gowns that the kinders wear for moving up day. Because if you look at the length of it, it barely hits like the top of his like jeans.
It wasn't Sarah Beth.
Yeah, so it's like they just dug that out.
You're right though. The through line or the common thread here is simply the location.
Yeah.
Philly. Which is a huge character on Abbott, right? And it's in the title of It's Always Sunny. So you're right. I think they really they thread that line in a really great way on this episode. And to your point, we'll see when we get the other episode for It's Always Sunny.
I'm excited. I know Dennis was very like didn't want to be on camera, so I'm interested to see like why. Like
he does his work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So he says.
And I really loved the plotline with the garden and Frank. And
let's talk about it. Frank versus Mr. Johnson. One of my favorite aspects of this episode.
I laughed so hard at the end when he took the car battery out. And Gregor was like, if he took that from his car, put it back. Like
the Mr. Johnson does the I'm watching you. One of my go-to moves.
Because they're just both. I feel like how they paired everyone was just so good. Like they all really balanced each other out. Like Charlie kind of starting off with drawing a blank.
With who was he with? Melissa, Barbara?
No, he started with
he was with Jacob.
Thank you.
He was with Jacob. Yeah, with the lesson, he was reading the board, and there were so many characters we love here. He was with Jacob. That's right.
Yes. And like not even being close, and like the 7th graders just like staring at each other. They're like, because those are those moments, right? And then D, like, and it's so funny watching her because she was so helpful at first, and then decided that she wanted to be with Eddie.
Sarah Beth, this was the class. This is also the name of my favorite Kehlani album. But this is a classic case of it was good until it wasn't.
Exactly.
The vibes were tremendous until they weren't.
Yeah. Because she just went insane so fast, which is very much like her character too. Like within It's Always Sunny. Like, and then, again, Mr. Johnson and Frank, like they were just killing me. Like so stupid, but so funny.
Yeah, they really played off each other super well.
And then Mac trying really hard.
Yes, and Mac trying. And
like going above and beyond.
He was doing a great. Okay. Sorry about that. This is wonderful. You're so right. And we've known, I'm not as hip to It's Always Sunny, but this is a real strength of Abbott. Like any fantastic sitcom, it's these different plot points within the episode. The show isn't just built around one central character and that's all of our investment. Abbott has really built up these characters to where we're invested
Yeah.
in their stories. And there were so many amazing parts of this episode. Okay, here are my questions for you. I want to structure this a little bit differently. I have 3 questions for you, particularly for this episode. Number 1, how proud were you of Melissa Chimenti during this episode? Because you may recall, she really cracked the case. She told the staff, including Ava, this group of volunteers, they're here because the court mandated volunteer hours. They're criminals. We know, this is on record, Sarah Beth, you are a huge Melissa fan. How proud were you of your favorite character?
I am always proud of Melissa. Like, we know that's my girl. But I was like, of course, it was just so funny too, because what I love about her is she's definitely like that. Like, she's like Philly. Like, you know, she knows the ins and outs. She knows everywhere. And like, for her, because even when she was like, have I met you guys before? And they're like, no, don't think so. And then she's like, have you ever gotten in a fight at an Eagles game?
Yes.
Like, I love just like everything about her. Like, she's the person that you want on your side because you know she's always going to have like your back.
Definitely. You want
And
to be
she
in her
wants to
class
prove
as
it,
well.
right?
Great
Yeah,
teacher,
because you
yeah.
know she's going to fight for you literally and figuratively. Like, she's always ready. And then when she put it 2 and 2 together, because it's like, yeah, out of that whole cast, she's the only person who would have ever stepped foot into Patty's pub. Like,
and likely the only person
Yeah.
who's gotten into consistent fights at
Yeah.
Eagles games.
that too.
Yeah.
And so, like, I just love, like, she's such a great, like, educator within the show, but she's also so rough around the edges, but also not, if that makes it, like, she's very refined and also still, like, rough. Like, she'll throw down for you and also, like, teach you to read, and I love, like, everything about that, you know? She's ready to kick out Charlie for being a criminal, but then also is, like, helping him learn to read, and I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Both things can be true. People are
Yeah,
dynamic.
right?
And going back to the point of Abbott really developing these characters, I think particularly this season, 2 of the biggest winners for me have been Mr. Johnson, which we'll get into later, and Melissa, because we've really unpacked layers of their character. One of my favorite episodes this season, Sarah Beth, I haven't even hit you up about this episode, when we went to Melissa's family's holiday party.
Yes.
Right? That was like, okay, now we understand why Melissa is the way she is, because
Yeah.
her family is very Italian. I say that as
Uh-huh.
someone with an Italian father. Her family is very Italian. You know, they kind of joke around as a family, and it just made so much sense why Miss Chimenti is who she is.
Yeah.
But we learned that this season. We're
Yep.
unpacking those layers of her character. I love it.
Yeah. No, I
It's
agree. I
fantastic.
really love getting to know more about her. Again, I'm a huge fan for so many reasons. Not just because, like, I relate to her on a spiritual level.
We love that for you. Yeah. Okay, my second question, and I have options for you. What is the best quote that we heard during this episode? And I have 4 candidates. You're welcome to choose a 5th, but I have 4 for you. Best quote: Ava, Caucasian cultural exchange. I'm not going to give any context. You have to watch the episode ideally before you tune into us. So that's option number 1, Ava, who's still a riot. Option number 2, or option B, Jacob. He said, students say I have the handwriting of a possessed doll. I felt this with my entire soul because I've been in that situation before. Next one, Ava. This is from Barbara. Ava, please remove these improper people from the premises post haste. Barb, we're going to get into Barbara later. And then final option for you. This is from, okay. You laid this up for me. This is kind of a hybrid. I'm kind of cheating here. This is D and then Gregory. D asks Greg, who she clearly has a crush on this episode, you know what they say about ambidextrous girls? And then really the choice here is what Greg said in response. So your final option, Sarah Beth, Greg says that they can write with both hands. I said, yo, this is the crossover event we've been waiting for. Sarah Beth, what is your choice? Best quote from this episode.
Oh, man. So it's funny because as you said it, I started to panic. So I was like, I can't even think of a single quote. And they said options. I'm like, great. And then as you were talking, I was like, oh, there were so many good ones also.
I got you.
I will say that the Ava, the cultural Caucasian quote As I rewatched everything this morning just to like be fresh. As soon as I heard that quote, you were my first thought where I was like, oh man, we got to talk about it. So I'm going with that
Go
one
with
just
Ava. I love it.
because
Yeah, it was
as
good. It was
soon as
really
I
good.
heard it, I was like, oh, I just know it's going to come up in our conversation.
Definitely.
Because it
And what I love
was-
about Ava, she'll it's not even in a closed space. She just says it in the hallway
Yeah.
with the volunteers and
Yeah, she is
her staff there.
so afraid because she doesn't care.
No.
Like just the stuff she says, and then you remember you're like, not only does she not care, she's the principal. Like she should. She doesn't. And I love
Ideally.
that about her.
You would think so. There was also an honorable mention here at the end of the episode. Jacob says to Greg, "We live in the city of brotherly love, my brother. It's always sunny in." And then it cut out. And I don't think that was just my feed. I think that was for your feed as well, Sarah Beth.
Yep.
That was specifically
Yes.
to get us for.
I did like
And
that.
it was a wink, wink to the audience. Yeah.
It was. I did also like the exchange between Dee and Gregory when she's like, "Meet me behind the gym mats in 15
15 minutes.
Like, and if I'm not there, wait longer."
Yeah, Greg really handled that situation well.
He really did.
I love our favorite teacher couple. Okay, final question for you for this episode. What was your favorite scene? We already mentioned some really strong contenders.
Uh-huh.
I'm looking back at my notes here. I love Gregory playing peacekeeper between Mr. Johnson and Frank, played by Danny DeVito, at the Garden from the very beginning. Yep. I love the back and forth, as you know, between Mr. Johnson and Frank throughout the episode. There are so many candidates here. Again, we've already covered a lot of them, so you're welcome to choose one of the ones we spoke about. But Sarah Beth, favorite scene from
it's a tie. Can I have a tie?
Episode. You can absolutely have a tie.
Okay. So one is when Janine and Dee are going at it in the hallway.
That's good.
And Greg comes out and he's like, "What are you doing?" And when he looks at her, he says, "Are you okay?" Like, it was just like such genuine concern. And then when she explains what's going on and she's like, "She's in love with you." And he's like, "Okay." And she's like,
"She's not a factor."
And she goes, "That would be awful." And he goes, "Agreed." Like, there's just something like, because I think we've all had that like little bit of like where we're Janine and we're kind of just losing it over. But like he was just so reassuring and just like, and never once was like, "You're being stupid, Janine," or "You're being ridiculous," or like, it was just like, "No, I'm with you. I want to be with you." Like, period. So that was a really great moment. And I just love the scene because it was just so funny because she's like losing it over Dee. And he's like, "I agree. It would be terrible."
Exactly.
And then I really liked the scene just because I thought it was so funny whenever Mr. Johnson's like, "I caught the raccoon."
Yes.
Says, That's the one. Do you want to bash his head in or do you want me to do it? And he's like, "It's Frank." And he's like, "I know." And that was it was just funny. Like, it was so perfect.
And Frank is just chilling in that cage. Like, "Yeah, you caught me."
With the pea pelts on him. And he's like eating the dirt.
Yes.
Because it tasted good. Because he's like,
classic Frank.
"Have you been eating the soil?" "Well, not until he put the garlic and the whatever else he put in there." And it's like it was just so insane.
It really was. That might be my choice, actually. You chose two strong ones. I think I might have to go with the latter. Any other observations or takeaways before we get into episode 10?
Not real. It was great. I'm really excited to see what It's Always Sunny does with it because it'll be really interesting to see it from that separate perspective.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, episode 10, testing. This clocked in at just under 3 million views, so we're thriving out here. Of course, it's going to be hard to top episode 9, but glad that nearly 3 million people and you and I are tuning in to this amazing season. Okay, here's the plot description. Janine and Melissa issue a practice test for their students. What could go wrong? And Janine's classroom underperforms. Jacob struggles to engage a disinterested student. Can't wait for your thoughts there. Attempting to fit him into multiple different clubs. The district sends a new custodian, played by Eric Andre, to train under Mr. Johnson. Meanwhile, Sarah Beth, the teachers fret about a potential bus strike in Philadelphia. So many dynamics at play. Before we get into the cold open, your initial thoughts on episode 10, testing.
It was obviously always good episode. I feel like I just say that every time.
But this one was very different
It was very
than
different
episode
types.
9. How did
I
it
felt
speak
like
to you?
episode 9 was just very funny, very
Right,
ridiculous,
right.
where this one was really, like, at that heart of things. Like,
Talk
I
to us.
definitely could relate to Janine a lot, where granted, I have very different feelings about standardized testing. Don't believe in it. But, like, you still want your kids to do well. And so then it's like when they don't, like, what could I do differently or what could I do? And like that reflecting. And that's been a big conversation this year that like the teaching practices that we're working with our kids, especially now that like science or reading has come in, we have, I actually just had this conversation recently with my principal and like my other third grade teachers where we're not seeing the growth in reading. But it's also because like what we were doing was kind of like a band-aid, and like when you know better, you do better. And like teaching is a science. And so we have better evidence of like evidence-based practices. And so you change what you do. You can't do like what I did 10 years ago doesn't work now, and that's okay. But we have to change like when we have the evidence. And I think that sometimes where like it gets hard, right? You have these educators, for some, like I loved hearing Barbara be like, so then change what you're doing. Like, because like some educators that have been in the game for 20, 30 years want to keep doing what they did 20, 30 years ago. And that's not how education is. Like it changes.
And
And
that's
so I
the
really
great
like,
challenge of the work is year in and
yeah,
year out, you have a
yeah,
different set of kiddos to support.
yep,
And as Melissa so eloquently put it during this episode, having it down, meaning having the
uh-huh,
teaching practice down, means you know when to switch it up.
exactly. Yeah. And,
It's pretty
you know,
profound.
while I don't believe standardized testing is a great measurement tool, it is, though the reality is like we have other data points. Like when you're looking at it, if it's not working, it's not working. Again, we talked about the preschool executive functioning lessons. Like I had to change my teaching practice to do what was best for my students. And so like I definitely related to Janine a lot in that way. And watching Jacob like fight so hard for RJ. And so like those pieces, like it was definitely a more relatable in that aspect of like it was more relational this episode to where I felt like episode 9 was just hilarious.
That's a great way to describe it. Let's stick with the RJ
Yeah.
character and like you said, Sarah Beth, the realness of him. So, as a reminder, RJ is a student in Jacob's class. And then this is really, we're introduced to RJ from the very beginning of the episode. Well, the cold open is Jacob trying to become friends with the bus driver on his way to school. And kids are also on, on
Yep.
the city transportation and show his support for their union for
Yep.
Serpa, and the driver just is not having any of it. He does not he's not necessarily showing the affinity for Jacob,
Jacob, yep.
in that
So what was it? The
respect.
daily update, the daily Jacob, I think is what he called it.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And then right after that, again, we cut to Jacob's class. He asks his students what were the Roaring Twenties known for. A really cool slide, by the
Uh-huh.
way, too. I thought aesthetically it was very pleasing. Shout
I
out to
had that
Jacob.
same thought. I was like, that's such
Did
a
you?
cool like way to
Oh,
present it.
yeah, the 5 images
Uh-huh.
and
And how
kids.
they like kind of like game show quality, like
Yeah, I'm proud of our guy. And
right?
so
Well, and that
this
tells me they have to have an educator somewhere on like staff,
interesting.
because I could see a teacher doing that as like a review. And I was like, there's no way, like, unless you have an education background. Because like that was like that's something like we'd go to a PD and like they'd introduce as like for something.
Right.
I was like, they have to have an educator somewhere on staff there.
I wouldn't doubt it. And then this is the realness, Sarah. I would imagine both you and I have been in this situation where the lesson's going well. Again, the vibes are great. You did your thing on that slide. It looks amazing. And you ask a question, what were the Roaring Twenties known for? And all these hands sprout up from students. There's a lot of answers in the room, but because you're not new to this, you're true to this, you've been in education, you know effective practices, you don't necessarily always call on the students who are raising their hand.
Yep.
You have to look at the ones who aren't, which leads Jacob to call on the aforementioned RJ, who just looks fairly despondent.
Yep.
And he asks, Jacob says, "Hey, RJ, I'm calling on you. What you got?" And RJ, Sarah Beth, I know you and I have been here. RJ says, "I don't know." again, not necessarily disrespectful,
Uh-huh.
because there's different levels
Yeah.
of student behaviors, not disrespectful,
Yep.
relatively compliant, but something is going on. He's not showing interest. What is happening here? So RJ gives Jacob the dreaded "I don't know." And unfortunately, we don't see what Jacob does next. I would have loved to have seen how, as a teacher, he handled
Yeah.
that. But instead, we cue to Jacob looking at the camera and, like, okay, this is going to be a plot point this episode. So later on, as you put earlier, Sarah Beth, Jacob is working with RJ throughout episode 10. He's trying to find what RJ's niche is. What does he like to do? This leads to Jacob welcoming RJ to the podcast club after school, which, obviously is something I love and it's close to my heart. So RJ is the guest on This Abbott Life, hosted by two of Abbott's students, and with, I would say, Gregory as the producer of the show.
Uh-huh.
So RJ's peers ask him, hey, RJ, what do you think about, I think it was the new archery equipment or something to that
Something,
effect.
yeah.
And again, RJ is not an ideal guest. He's not necessarily a Sarah Beth in that regard. RJ says, I don't like to talk, so I don't think this is really for me, to Jacob after the fact. And then later on, Jacob invites RJ to Gregory's gardening club. And although RJ shows more prowess there than the podcast club, it's clear that RJ isn't loving it. He's not having a good time. There was even, do you remember when they were at the step practice as well? Ava was there and Ava knew that RJ wasn't feeling it. We have those students, whether they're in third grade or ninth grade
Yep.
or older, where you just try to connect with them. And you just try to help them find
Yeah.
a hobby. How did the RJ character speak to you as you work with kiddos who may also be going through that same experience?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, we've all had that kid that is just attached. I think what's interesting about RJ, and I have a feeling his storyline isn't done, excuse me, is that he still showed up to all those things.
He did.
Like, because he said, I don't like talking, but he showed up to podcast club. And he showed up for STEP, even though he clearly hates it. And so I think it's interesting because, like, he's clearly looking for some sort of connection, or he wouldn't still be showing up. Even though he hated the first two things, he still showed up. He showed up for gardening. And so we talked last time, like, relationships are so huge in that, like, connection piece. And, like, sometimes that's all it is, because I love, one of the things I love about Ava is she's always, like, right in some ways, where it's like, all the, like, right, like, most of the episodes, she's very, like, self-centered and does what she wants and is barely working as a principal. But then it's like, there's usually, like, at least one moment within the episode where you're like, all right, that was good. Because she's the one that pointed out, she's like, did you ask him what he likes to do? And James like, no. And I think sometimes that gets hard, right? Like, us as educators, like, we get so wrapped up in fixing the problem that sometimes, like, we forget that, like, we're dealing with humans with their own likes and dislikes and wants and needs. And sometimes, like, we get so wrapped up in, like, thinking we know what they want and thinking we know what will fix it. And that, like, we don't always, like, take a step back and, like, think, like, oh, maybe I should see what he wants to do first. We talk a lot about, like, reward-based activities or whatever, but, like, if the kid doesn't want the reward, if they don't find it enticing, they're not going to work for it. But then we still keep offering them the same reward.
Yeah.
And it's like,
kids can only eat so many grape Jolly Ranchers before.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, dude, I get it. I'm full.
Yeah. And if they're not, like, tangible based, if they would prefer, like, a phone call home or whatever, like, but that's the thing, is, like, we get so wrapped up in, and kind of like we were talking before, like, doing what we've always done, sometimes it does have to change.
Mhm.
So, like, I definitely have related there with, like, RJ of, like, trying to fix that problem. And sometimes it does take that, like, stepping back and be like, wait a second, let's start with the relationship first and then go from there.
Totally. And isn't that when education is at its best, particularly exiting COVID? School is meant to be a place for community. It's a place for learning, but it's also that social opportunity, right? To find community, to challenge your own beliefs or assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, if I think the past 5 years have taught us anything, it's reaffirming that is when school is at its best.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
totally agree. Like we show up for connection, we show up for
we
community.
do. Even as teachers, right? I think that's an appealing part of the gig in the first place, is not just ideally being someone positive in your community,
Yeah.
but inevitably, and I don't know about you, Sarah Beth. I don't think I knew this heading into the profession, but the bonds you create with your colleagues,
Yeah.
I don't even know how to measure all
Uh-huh.
that's come from that in my life and all I've gained from that and the joy it's brought in me.
Yeah,
It's one of
like
the best parts of the gig.
yeah, like some of my best friends I've met because of education and because like what we've been through and those relationships like you can build that I don't know that I would have seen it either like going into education. You think more about like the things that you're going to, and I don't even know that I really thought much about the relationships until I really started teaching. Like I knew it was like a piece of it, but I don't think I realized how important it would be
It's a big piece.
until
If you
I
don't have the
started. Yeah,
relationships,
you don't have anything. Yeah,
you're probably not long
it's like that
for the
old,
profession.
Rita Pearson quote: "Kids don't learn from people they don't like."
It always goes back to Rita P. Absolutely.
Rest in peace. I think she
Yes.
passed. I shouldn't say
Yeah,
that.
no, you're right. No,
Pretty
you're
sure
right.
she
No,
did, but then as I said it, I was like, maybe I shouldn't say
no,
that.
no, you're absolutely right. She has. But
Yeah,
the TED Talk, her
yeah.
words,
The TED
live
Talk
on
we've all watched as
for
educators
generations.
800
Yes.
times, but like it's true.
Yeah,
Like,
we have every district, welcome back.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like
With
there are
good
times
reason.
where like, especially now, we get a lot of educators who don't have a background in education. So they got their bachelor's in accounting and then went and got their master's and came back. And they tend to have like an old school, you should do what I told you to do because I said it. And I've had like teachers that have said to me, like, they're like, well, why do my students listen to you and not me? And I'm like, well,
How do
because I
you how do
treat
you
them
how do
like
you how do you navigate that?
depending on like the relationship I have with the person, but most of the time I'm pretty like honest about it. And I tell them, I'm like, it's because I treat them like they're people. Like, I treat them like they're a person. And, and I've had, years ago, I had a teacher like tell me, well, that might work for you, but that's not how I run my classroom. And I was like, okay. Like, I can't change your mind, but also you just came to me and asked me why your students are showing me more respect than you. Because I treat them with respect. Like, I treat them like
Don't
they're
ask the
people.
question if you don't want if you
Yeah.
don't want the answer.
That's what it comes down to. Like, there's definitely a fine line. And I don't know if it's like mostly social media, like something I've noticed. Some of the videos that get posted, I think boundaries have to be in place. I'm still the teacher. I'm not your best friend.
Right. I'm not your
There's
big
like a
sis. I'm not
line
your
on
big
how you
bro.
get to talk to me and how like
Right.
there is this line, but again, they are still people. They are
Right.
still, they're not, I don't know what word I want, but like we have to have that relationship. I think what is hard is some teachers, especially now, I think social media makes it easy to think certain behaviors are okay. Because like some of the stuff I've seen, just like the high school teachers that like film themselves, like they don't show the kids, but, like interacting, where I'm like, you're too friendly. There is a line,
Mm-hmm.
especially like, and I know I'm not in the high school sector. It's harder, especially when you're younger, because that age gap is very close.
Right.
That you
Yeah.
do still have to have those boundaries in place, especially because the age gap is so close.
Exactly.
Because it's
Yeah.
easier to, look and be like, oh, that's not my teacher, that's my friend.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think everybody goes through it. And
Yeah.
but before I ask you about a plot point in this episode, Sarah Beth, that's so great what you said, because to me, you have to approach the work with humility, the
Mhm.
work of being a teacher. And one of the best aspects is, I know when I reflect on my career, I think I've had the most fun and I've been at my best when I looked at colleagues who were doing well and were experiencing success, and I tried to take one aspect of what they do and bring it back to my room and deliver it
Absolutely.
in my own way.
Uh-huh.
Right? Instead of that, oh, I have to do it my way or I have to be better than them. No, I think
Yeah.
ideally we take at least one thing from each person in
Yeah.
my pod or each person in my department.
Uh-huh.
I bring that back to my room, and then, maybe I'm
Yeah.
making progress in that day-to-day interaction with kids, and I feel more
Yeah.
effective.
Absolutely. I love one of my best friends teaches at my site. She teaches 5th grade. And I love when I get to go down to her room for observations. And she's in her like 3rd year teaching, 4th year. I walk away every time with something new to do. Last year I had a student teacher who was phenomenal. There were so many times I'd be sitting there like watching her and being like, I'm taking that idea.
Yeah.
Like so many times.
Have the humility to ask sometimes.
Yeah.
If it's not already a part of your semester, your admin has it orchestrated,
Yeah.
having the humility to ask a colleague, hey, can I observe you for
Yeah.
20 minutes during my
Popping
prep
in
to
because
see?
like we learn so much from
We
each
do.
other,
We
like
do.
all the
Absolutely.
time. And that's one of my like favorite things. Like, and I was having this conversation recently. Like, again, I learned so much from our new teachers. And so, but like you do have to, because there are times I've had conversations with people and, you know, again, it goes back to like, why does that work for you? And like, on one hand, yeah, what works for me won't always work for someone else. There are those differences, but also when you're not willing to even try, you know, but like teaching is so like based on not just relationships with the students, but like relationships with everyone else too.
Absolutely. And being willing to fail at
Yeah,
something.
willing to fail. Try
It's
it and
not
it
it's
doesn't
not
work.
going to go well sometimes. Yeah, you
Yeah.
got to adjust and
Like,
that,
I
that's
constantly am saying that. I'm like, "So what's the worst that happens? It doesn't work and we try again tomorrow."
yeah. And
Like,
and when kids can see you approach that again with humility
yeah,
of when it doesn't go well, you can, even if you feel comfortable admitting that, like, hey, okay, this did not go well, or that did not go
uh-huh,
well yesterday. That's on me. Now
yeah,
let's get back into the content and get excited
exactly.
about
I'm
this
such
new
a
approach.
believer in, like, having those realistic conversations and failing in front of our kids
Huge,
because I've
huge,
noticed
huge
last
modeling.
few years, like, so many kids, like, it's that coming in with perfectionism and so much learned helplessness, that the only way, like, we combat that is by, like, modeling for them how to fail. You know, we started a new phonics program this year, and I didn't learn phonics as a kid. Like, I learned almost completely by memorization. So it's really hard for me to teach because I'm having to go back and like learn. But like I have one aha moments with them all the time where I'll be like, oh, that's why that's like letter makes that sound when it's with this letter because like I didn't know. But like I genuinely like have those moments with them. But there was just a time earlier this week where I was teaching part of it wrong, the rule wrong. And because my kids were like, well, but what about this word? It wouldn't fit with that rule. I'm like, you guys are right. I said, so we're gonna pause because I'm not sure that I understand this rule and I don't want to teach you wrong. We're gonna come back to it later. I need to make sure I understand it. But like I have those realistic conversations with them all the time
Well played.
because they need to see it and they're more likely to try and they're
Right.
more likely to fail. It's okay to fail.
Right. A student asked me a literary question. I'm like, I'm gonna get back to you on
Yeah.
that. There's this pressure of I have
Yeah.
to be all knowing. I have to be the
Yeah.
one vessel of knowledge in the room. That's
Yeah.
not
I tell
realistic.
them like
Be a
that's a great
person.
question.
Know your
We should
stuff,
look into
but be a
that. Like,
person.
I don't know the answer. Let's look into it.
Yeah, that's great
And it's how,
modeling.
like, yeah, when they see us learning, they, see it as like they get to continue learning.
Amen, Sarah Beth. Amen. Okay, on to or back to episode 10. Couple points I want to hit before we wrap up here. A takeaway I had from this episode is that Mr. Johnson and Barbara are mirror images of each other. I didn't realize this until leaving episode 10, but when I think about their roles at the school, functionally very
Uh-huh.
different, but they are the OGs.
Yeah.
People look to them for guidance, for best
Uh-huh.
practices, for all of it. Now, we've been knowing Barbara's viewed that way, particularly
Yep.
through the lens of Janine, looking
Uh-huh.
up to Barbara
Yeah.
as the role model.
Mm.
But I love that this episode with Eric Andre's character for on the custodial side
Uh-huh.
of things, the district sent him over. His name is
Yeah.
Cedric in this episode. Cedric, the new custodian, by way
Cedric
of
the
the
janitator.
Cedric the janitator. Thank you, Ava.
It's so stupid. Like,
Cedric, yeah, and it plays on that
yeah.
dynamic of by the end of the episode, Cedric admits or confesses to
Mhm.
Mr. Johnson, hey, the district sent me over because they're trying to replace you. And Mr. Johnson, again, the OG he is, says,
Yep.
youngster, I knew that, but
Yeah.
no one can do it like
And
me,
yeah.
respectfully. And then he proceeds to walk on his treadmill
Yeah.
because he is the best at
He's
what he
Mr.
does.
Johnson. Like,
I just didn't realize how similar these two characters
uh-huh.
are and how instrumental both Barbara and
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson are to the day-to-day
Uh-huh.
at Abbott.
It's funny because that was definitely my thought process this morning was just how instrumental Mr. Johnson is and how instrumental positions like that are to our day-to-day jobs.
Talk
Like,
about it.
I learned about that very early on. There's so many aspects of my job that I could not do without people like Mr. Johnson, without our front office staff, without like our parapros who are coming in, without just our custodians, our people in the cafeteria. Like, those are like our unsung heroes. They don't get the credit that they deserve. I love hearing the parallel though between him and Barbara. Like, that is such a good, I love that.
They're
But,
the
like,
North
exactly.
Stars of Abbott.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they really are. Like, the school could not run without them.
No.
And
No.
like, I
And what they
know,
mean to their colleagues.
yeah, and I know, like, he's always got kind of like the more outlandish. He definitely like reminds me of like Creed from The Office, where like he just says like the most out of pocket. But again, he's always the one coming in clutch. He's always the one who, like, yeah, he says all these things that are insane, but he's also the one that's always there for anyone there on that staff who needs him.
Well said. And he's
And
got eyes on Ava and Oshan.
yeah,
He knows what's going on.
I
He
love
knows.
that storyline. I can't wait to see how that unfolds.
Me neither. My final point I wanted to hit here, Sarah Beth, with you are the teases, 2 in particular teases that we get on episode 10. Again, the aforementioned Oshan and Ava romance. We know it's building to something. Like you, I can't wait to see what is in store. And then also, I believe I correctly predicted this. Barbara teasing retirement. I know you saw that scene where she's at the nail salon with Melissa, and Barbara asked Melissa, "Hey, have you ever considered retirement?" And then I believe the news of the strike went on TV, and then we cut away from that conversation. But Barbara's going to announce her retirement at some point, and tears will be shed.
Oh, I'm sure. Like, it's going to be very emotional. It's funny you say that too, because like, this episode, because it was how every time Barbara said something, or every time someone said something, then Janine wouldn't listen, and then Barbara would say it, and she's like, yeah, but she said it more majestically.
Yes.
Like, there was just something about that kind of stuck out, where I was like, that's such a weird that they keep doing. Like, it was funny.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting they kept doing that, and then leading up that I hate that you're probably right, because I love Barbara, though I don't see her like stepping away totally.
Right.
I feel like she'll still come back somehow, because I just don't know that the show would be the same without her.
Yeah,
but
so
I
true.
do think she's getting close. Probably like, if they were smart, that would be like the season finale, like, right? Because they like to leave us on a cliffhanger.
Yep, I think it's going to happen.
That I figure the cliffhanger will have something to do with retirement, whether she actually retires, says she's going to retire.
Right. She gets the contract springtime. Does she sign the contract to return?
Yeah. So I figure that'll probably, I'm buying into your prediction as much as I hate it. But
it's a great way to put it.
I could see that's how they lead it. Like, I could see them kind of building on it, right? They've already started to really tease it, right? Have you thought about retiring? And kind of getting shut down. And I could see too them kind of like teasing it. And then like when she announces it at the end, and they're all shocked. Like, she keeps trying to bring it up and like getting cut off.
Right, exactly.
And then at the end, when she does bring it up, and they're like, how could you, like, how did we not see this coming? And she's like, well, I've been saying it.
Right. And we saw one of
our kind of being like their Easter egg too.
Yes. And we had a similar conversation with Janine.
Yeah.
About what does her future in the classroom look like. Very different. She was not ascending, but she was becoming a district diva, right? But now for Barbara, it's, hey, I've led this long storied career. She wouldn't say that, other people would, and now it's maybe my time to hang it up.
Yeah. So
we'll see what happens, Sarah Beth.
I'm buying into it. I don't want to, but
I'm glad I've convinced at least one.
At least one.
That is the only one so far.
Begrudgingly convinced.
Exactly. Well, Sarah Beth, in lieu of an exit ticket, I just want to include 2 final notes here on this episode. What a wonderful conversation. We are thinking of the Mesa Public Schools community. The district, Arizona's largest, announced forthcoming staff layoffs. That'll be for the 2025-26 school year, citing declining student enrollment. And we ask that you all please consider donating to disaster relief efforts. by texting CA Wildfires, that's all caps, CA Wildfires, to 90999, or visiting redcross.org/donate. This information will also be here on YouTube in the episode description, or if you're listening, check out the episode description on your platform of choice, and information will be there. Before we get out of here, Sarah Beth, just want to take a temperature check. How is your spirit, my friend? I know Mesa Public Schools is very far from Marana Unified School District, but as we step in, we're not even stepping, we're into this new year, nationally, locally, there, I guess just a vibe check. How are you? How's your spirit? And I want you to know how thankful I am for the amazing work you do.
Thank you. We're hanging in there, trying to hold on to hope. It's always hard to hear that public education's funding's being cut. Mesa's far, but it's not that far, and that's the reality of the expansion of the ESA vouchers. It hurts our public school kids, because that's the hard thing too, is that not only does my heart break for those teachers that are losing positions, the at least sort of good thing, as terrible as it sounds, there's always a teacher shortage. But it's also, that means those kids are probably going to bigger class sizes. And it's a disservice to our students. And so that's what sucks. Even though, yes, Mesa's very far, but what happens what happens to our students in Arizona, whether it's in the county I work in or not, matters, because all our students, not just in Arizona, in America, all our students deserve the right to an education. And so that's I didn't know about what happened with Mesa. So it's rare for someone to give me new news to be the first to give me breaking news about public school. It's usually me informing people that I work with of hey, did you hear about this bill that passed?
Yeah.
Hear about
right.
this?
I wish it were better news.
Yeah. It's unfortunate to hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, but remembering that we're in it for the relationships, we're in it for what's best for our kids, and that regardless of what our legislature decides to do, my promise is always to fight for our kids in public education. And
I think that's great.
That we've got allies across the board fighting for education as well.
I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation. Sarah Beth, thank you so much for joining us. Your second appearance here on 4AZ. In case folks missed your original episode, they need to check it out, by the way, or in case they may have forgotten, how can our audience connect with you and support your work?
Instagram, Dear Sarah Beth, is probably the easiest. So,
period. You know what to do. That is your homework.
Exactly.
If you're watching, you're listening, please follow Sarah Beth. Again, she's at Dear Sarah Beth. We would love for you to like this video, leave us a 5-star review, and of course, please follow us at 4AZ Teach for exclusive show updates and more. I thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.